You've already been introduced to Dave. Arterburn. Lars is coming up. Lars is a G10. He's responsible for all the digitization, and Dave's the guy over at the certification office that's making all the transformation decisions. So looks like you're first, Dave.
You guys blind? So, every 12-step process, admitting that you have a problem, and yes, I'm an airworthiness authority. So, these views I'm going to share today are my views. They're not necessarily the views of management and stuff, but I have been asked to help facilitate innovation within the way the Army manages airworthiness. So that's what I'll proceed. Slide, please. One of the first observations I have is that there's no shortage of ambition in the digital arena, right? Everybody wants something better than they have right now. The stuff on the left-hand side, I view those as mostly product attribute type of things we want to have being digitally enabled on a system. And the thing on the right is more of a process thing. How do we want to go about getting that thing developed, that capability developed, fully, the concepts developed, the system developed, tested, and fielded. So we have today dabbled in both of those. Each one of those is a mouthful to try to swallow, okay? And you can't do them all at once. So I would recommend that as we start going forward, we kind of differentiate between what element of this thing are we trying to focus on, because as we try to focus on both things, we'll do them both equally, not as good as we could do each one individually. So in addition to getting help from senior leadership at OSD and service level, we also occasionally get some assistance from Congress. Those of you that are following what's going on at Capitol Hill right now, the House just passed the Aircraft Certification Reform and Accountability Act. It's gone to the Senate about a week and a half ago, and it's going to change the landscape of aircraft certification. I think we all know what might have prompted Congress's interest in that recently. So stay tuned. The House version was about 88 pages of light reading. I imagine that when it comes out of the Senate, it's going to have additional pages and some changes. We'll go to conference, and we'll all be the recipients of something to help us prevent problems that might have happened in the recent past and stuff. So stay tuned for that. Slide, please. So this has already been fairly well talked about. I want to focus just on one aspect of it, and it's to me, words matter. So we've used the phrase today, the phrases multiple times. Single source of truth, authoritative source of truth, something of truth, right? Truth is an interesting word in and of itself, right? It implies that what is in that body of information is factual. It's not aspirational. It's not what we hope it will be. It's what it is, what it can do, what has been demonstrated or proven to be able to do at an appropriate level of reliability and confidence, right? So at least from my viewpoint as a certifier, right, as a official. So when we use that term source of truth to the uninitiated, we have to ensure that they don't derive meaning from that beyond which is intended, right? So initially, we have a lot of things that we're starting doing proof of concept and studies like that. That's all aspirational at that point in time. It's what we hope the system will develop. And when we allow decision makers to attach meaning to that word source of truth, we have to be cautious, right? Because at some point in time in that developmental timeline of that repository of data and relationships, then that will become truth. But I think initially it's not, and we have to be cautious about the use of that term. Slide, please. So I think MC Escher said it best, right? Everything's possible in PowerPoint, right? You can make stairs that go up infinitely, right? My counterpart at the NavAir ACO has a similar thing that she uses frequently. that says the I believe button, right? There's a lot of these aspirational visions and strategies that are provided down to us that yet take some degree of faith, a leap of faith in saying, I've got confidence that thing will achieve that which it's supposed to achieve. And we're not quite there yet on digital engineering as a concept. So slide, please. There is a reason that the world record in the 100-meter dash is 9.58 seconds, and the world record in the 100-meter hurdle is 12.2 seconds, right? Because there's a lot of things that keep you from just running fast, okay? And these are some of the things that are still works in progress, right? The things like governance of data, okay? Those, who is going to have responsibility for governing that? I'll use the phrase that I just told myself not to, authoritative source of truth, right? Who's going to own that? Is it owned by the system developer? Is it owned by the system integrator? Is it owned by the sustainment people? Who does that, and who authorizes changes to it and things? We have some tools that might facilitate the use of that, or the management of it, but just basic governance and ownership of those data is something that's still a decision to happen. We talked about the development of workforce skills. Didn't really speak much about retention of those skills. As Dr. Lewis likes to say, the half-life of calculus unused is measured in months. Facility and use of these tools is a challenge, especially when you're working at a regulator. I'll call ourselves a regulator right now, who is traditionally at the end of the life cycle process. We're trying to get up earlier in right now, but traditionally, when you get trained on a set of tools, and each program is bringing a different set of tools or a different set of data to you, different method that their chosen OEM is using, and your currency and facility to be able to use those is limited, right? So we have to get better at that. Future of work, which is what we're calling the transition to telework, right? The little things like making sure that your laptop has enough memory on it, RAM on it, to be able to host even the most primitive of some of these complex models, and that your pipeline on your personal Wi-Fi is big enough to let the data shove through at a rate that you can actually do something with it, right? Because let's face it, our workforces have tasted the better side of life, if you want telework, and we're going to be living with that from now on to some extent. We don't know where that balance is, but we're going to be here. So we have things to work through as we go through this. So there's still a lot of work to do with that. Slide, please. As big of an issue is there is a sense of expectation that we're going to get there soon, right? And everybody's rushing toward the finish line. It's going to take us some time, and we have to help set expectations that we'll be growing pains, that we'll be working through challenges, that they're not insurmountable, but that they are present challenges, and they will take some time and effort to get through. And we have to condition the expectations of those who are seeking to make decisions that, you know, it's coming. It may not be on the timeline that you'd like it to be. It may require more effort, more investment to get to where you want to be. That's one of the big lessons we've learned right now, is we have grossly underestimated the amount of effort and the amount of resource it takes to get to the proficiency in this capability. So one thing that Matt mentioned was about what's the phrase he used? Data creep for decision making, and he focused on us engineers' constant desire for more. I want more data. When do I have enough data to make a decision? That's a very valid point. I would also caution that making sure that we do actually have enough data to validate or to make sure that we can make a decision is equally as important. It's dangerous to make decisions before you know what's going on, as opposed to having, you know, maybe unnecessary expenditure of resources to get more data. So I'll wait for questions till after the other speakers.
So as Mr. Cripps introduced, I'm the chief engineer for the PEO. You have my slides? Yeah. And so I lead digital engineering. I should put a little bit of context. Rodney tried to. I have a counterpart in business, a counterpart in logistics. So James Bamberg's our chief logistician. He has, go to the next slide. He has a similar set of responsibilities for logistics automation tools. He has a lot of that collaboratively with AMCOM. My counterpart in business, Ms. Connie Goodwin, has a similar set. Her partner, if you will, is ASALT. We have a good set of partnerships with ASALT and to a lesser degree up in OSD, ANS. But they've provided some shaping guidance, and we try to work within it. Frequently, we're kind of one of their better children is a way I would describe our relationship with them. But this is our world in my shop in terms of the collaborative digital engineering environment that we're trying to do. And we've taken these, we've kind of triaged them, prioritized them. And MBSE was our first priority. Product line managers, the second priority. The risk manager is our current area, along with advanced software lifecycle management. There's about 5 terms, and it doesn't really converge. Most people call it a software factory, or they call it agile software. You can't use agile software all the time, every application that you want to put in a weapon system. But the ideas of doing continuous ATO are so precious. The ability to do rapid software to respond to threats is just such a necessity for us. We're definitely going to do some. And so my lead for that is Carmela Rice. For MBSE and PLM, Joe Carter over there we had an awful lot of contribution. Tony Sill sitting right next to him. We use our friends from MITRE a lot on the MBSE side, along with a gentleman named Gene Shreve to let you know who our smart guys are that make me look good and keep my ass out of jail on a regular basis. In the analysis and simulation has been a significant work area. We're working a program called Air Launched Effects. It's part of the FVL ecosystem, FARA and FLARA and FTUAS. ALE is a tool for giving the cab more mobility in contested environments. It's a good way to sum up what ALE does for living. We are, between FARA, FLARA, and ALE, doing a massive amount of mission effectiveness and survivability analysis. And we're tying together what we're doing in our MBSE efforts, our PLM efforts, and those efforts to guide the refinement of requirements and the programs and our technology pull and our technology needs that are going back out to DevCom. So I think when you look at making a full digital engineering transformation, when we talk to industry, we think it's about a 10-year process. But we can't, as you might expect, say to whether it's AFC or Chief of Acquisition at AFC, Lieutenant General Todd, or General Rugen at our local CFT, FVL CFT, and say, no, new processes are going to take 10 years. So we have to make things better now without breaking what we do, without breaking our ability to certify with what I still call AED, because then I can sort out which part of SRD I'm talking about. And if that drives DevCom crazy, it really just doesn't bother me. But I will say one of the key things we've been trying to do at MBS is refine use cases to be able to go back and forth with our stakeholders and say, how do you want to fight? How do you want to fly? How do you want to aviate, navigate, communicate? How do you want to maintain? How do you want to sustain? How do you want to interoperate both with the rest of the unit, the joint force, and the coalition force? Because when it goes over to the COCOMs and they go fight, they fight as a coalition joint task force. And that's where we need to be able to do that. So I need to understand the specifics of whether it's a CFT or a requirements development directorate, what do you mean? Because that drives the requirements better from the beginning. Even if we get not as much as we hope out of the rest of DE, if we get that better, we'll make better fighting platforms. And I think will prevent requirements creep, because I think a lot of requirements creep is requirement realization that sometimes doesn't happen for us as a community to get into it. I will say we also are doing risk management. We have a collaborative with PO Missiles in Space. I think we've done a good job of leveraging both AFMIC as our in-between between us and PEO and the other entities on post. There is a Redstone DE team that is largely run out of AFMIC, but in the case of Risk Manager, we're literally picking up their solution and bringing it across to us. We have tools. We have gone, if you will, enterprise-wide on MBSE. We have 10 PMs in the PEO, one of which, MASPO, you may know, does a lot of non-standard things. So we tend to talk about, for things like this that are advanced process for US products, we have 9 participating PMs. For PLM, we're doing a phased rollout, depending upon which PM and what they were doing in their life cycle and so forth like that, working our way across that, because we're taking a large amount of existing data in a lot of cases, or setting up FAR and FLAR to be able to receive what's coming in. In some ways, I would say the first wave that hit us about doing DE, you'd like to think it was, we want to do it better. So it was just a certain amount of panic that on the acquisition side of every time we get, a package in the mail from Sikorsky, et cetera, we're going to get their format, which is largely out of their digital systems. And we needed to immediately get where we had a much better ability to absorb that. So we've been moving PM shops from legacy processes using procedural management tools and moving them to product line managers, which have a much larger set of capabilities and resources and are a lot more complicated. And in some ways, we're taking away things like their procedural management tool. So it causes a little bit of culture shift as well. My group's responsible for training the capabilities here. We have courses both that we teach internally, we contract out some, we DAU some, and then through the RM, Missile and Space doing it. We have a great partner out of AFMIC called the Renegade team for the product line manager, and they have some really outstanding people. It is a mixture of folks that know CM, DM, production, and engineering. And it's fascinating to watch it in process, where their ability to think through data and be data engineers, not just system engineers. Next chart. I'll try and go quicker. You saw across the top, and it's probably not visible, but you saw the bombs in the PLM, and you see requirement allocation and flow down. And we provide our capabilities to Matt's team as well. Particularly the MBSE tools, where as they do things like the FAF, the EAF, and the component spec models, they're using our tools to do that and providing those libraries of architectures that go with libraries of reusable software code. So that's something we want to facilitate. If you think about why you do MOSA, it's to do cheaper, to not reinvent the wheel, and to be able to drive our cycle time down from multi-year to multi-month. And for aviation guys to talk about doing OFP revs and say, I want to do it in 6 months, most of them just kind of tilt their head at you and look at you like you're flat crazy, okay? But if you go back to 4 years ago, 3 years ago, and you were chasing around Syria, and people show up in Syria with missiles we didn't think we would see in Syria. And we got to change our systems now, or we endanger our crews. That's just something that we're not going to do. That's not going to go away. That is, it goes back to even, you go a little further back, it's less of an aviation consideration, but it's Army consideration. You go back to the counter IED fight. The opponents would rev the IEDs every 6 months. They'd figure out what we were doing to jam IEDs or detect IEDs, and we'd see a different creativity come out of those guys in the Taliban and Al-Qaeda in Iraq, et cetera. So we got to change our time for at least our mission software and our mission capabilities, the ability to bring mission level boxes. I think Mr. Mason frequently says that when it comes to the fundamental fly the aircraft safely, navigate the airplane safely, we're probably going to have long-term stability on that. The FADEC on that ITEP that was talked about this morning, probably going to be a pretty stable bit of hardware and software over long periods of time, pretty highly qualified, flies the aircraft, provides power, power provides lift, etc. So these are some of our status items. We've been at the MBSE for several years. FLAR particularly is used extensively in preparing the materials that have gone out. It's part of their acquisition, and the FLAR guys are pretty well inculcated. The project line manager tools going out to the PMs over the last year and a half, and Carmela on the advanced software. This is the spring where she works on IOC. She also leads a collective training effort with the synthetic training environment CFT, and that is kind of a pilot program for that. Next slide. This is the PLM rollout. You can see it's phased. You can see our project offices. Next slide. And so the subdivisions we're doing it in as well. This is not on here per se to you to read, but in terms of one of our real challenges, I mentioned it this morning, I got to get PM shop guys, I got to get AED guys, I got to get other AVMIC folks, I got to get OEMs or subs, CETAs, potentially ASOL, OSD, etc., access to the right chunks of the right data with the right restrictions and usually the right training and certification. So when that person is accessing information, it's only information they're supposed to see by person, etc. Some of it my shop will do. Some of it, this process is managed out of what's now called the Enterprise Information Systems Directorate or Division, the IT guys. And then some of it's in the PM shop down below the product manager because they know their contractors, whether they're CETA or OEMs, have contractual relationships with them and name by name, and that's largely going to happen at the product manager level. But our job is to provide processes that we know and work in all those ways. At this moment, we are largely centered on CACs and ECAs, which are certificate-based identifications for non-CAC holders. That's about the only way we can get through basically the cyber defenders of the network. Next slide. And we have looked at the cloud solutions. Cloud solutions look great on TV commercials. For those of us in the DoD, trying to find a DoD cloud that runs, has a contract, has ceiling, works, and has your apps and ability to and understands your language is still a bit of a unicorn hunt. So we're locally hosted. We have our own servers, etc. I don't think that's permanent. I think particularly for the advanced software, you probably will see a cloud approach. That's been the paradigm the last several years. One of the things that the software guys get is they get software engineers out of college. Those guys are used to, like my son was, GitHub and lots of open source and freeware type both management tools and repositories and sharing and collaboration that there's no way we'll get approved. So we're generally looking for equivalents to those that run in a sufficiently protected place with enough watertight doors that when somebody gets in and either does something to code in the repository or extracts material information from the repository, the watertight doors seal. Non-trivial set of problems. Next slide. We do have a governance, we have a policy, we have, like say, training. We're under frequent review by the ACWG. The Architecture Control Working Group is largely a body in support of Matt's effort, but they have a digital engineering subgroup as well. And then we're responded to the tech chiefs and the project office, as well as the leadership, Mr. Mason, General Barry as well. Pretty good collaborative with the AVMIC people, but as I think anybody who's done this, is as soon as I say that AVMIC gets what we're doing, why we're doing, how we're doing, and that they fluidly come in and out of our MBSE teamwork collaborator, et cetera, I'm going to get an earful about I can't, I don't, I won't, or something along those lines. But we're pledged to an enterprise solution. That's my guidance from the PEO leadership and beyond, because we don't think we can succeed if we don't. Next slide. That was the other thing I wanted to notice on that is we've got a set of training for practitioners. We have it's kind of like having a combination of a state technical college with a couple different courses and having a university with course. So we got the equivalent of a welding class, an equivalent of building trades class, and an architect's class. So we teach 05 PMs with no technical background enough to be able to do this and supervise people. We do training for tech chiefs who aren't sometimes system engineers, certainly not necessarily software types, but they have to be able to keep her on their SEs and software engineers as well. So trying to tailor for each of those guys as well. I think we're starting to move from the get started, get initial training to getting our equivalent of prompt change requests back on our processes, tools, and installations from the product managers. The people over, again, in Florida are the loudest because, you know, they've got a multi-billion-dollar contract they're trying to let with a lot of these tools. Yep. Next slide. That may be close to done in this deck. This is just a little bit about the software. Carmela's was lead for advanced software up at OSD on an assignment for a bit more than a year. She's brilliant at this. One of the things here is to not try and slay all the dragons in one spot and to allow for stuff in the upper right, the Federation of Software Factories and the time together. There's a formal software term. It sounds generic, but it's not, called connectors that allow for multiple of these to work together and get where you can have an integrated system built out of it. And then key item is this reuse repository, largely leveraging FACE as the coding standard, if you will, for reusability. Next slide. One other thing, she talks about how she's going to change culture. I think the MBSE and PLM, the PLM stuff is going to seem reasonably familiar to most CMDM people and an awful lot of engineers. It's going to make their life better without necessarily completely warping the worldview. I think for software types, advanced software with the Kubernetes and the containers, the continuous ATO processes, the technical debt, and the way that Agile runs is different enough. It's certainly radically different from waterfall software. It's trying to get radical change in the performance of your software development process as well. So I think she's got a bigger cultural problem than we do. Next slide. These are our risks in terms of people and processes. I think where I'm most worried now. You know, I think it's some factor of the situation, the folks we've got, the folks we're working with. I remember when I first really started to deal with Mr. Bogosian and the PEO, it very much fiefdoms between the PM shops 10, 12, 14, 15 years ago. And some of the statements that he and General Crosby made about how much you could steer the fiefdoms. It's a lot different now. We do try and run much more as enterprise, but it's non-trivial to get folks from Apache to think alike like FARA, although the missions are so remarkably similar, and there's an awful lot of shared technology. And the way that we got to do that is I've got to have engineers, the give or take 700 engineers that the PEO has, essentially have one way of doing things, some local tailoring. And it's weird, we get some pushback on even the idea of that. So it's a work in process about having processes be process-centered, workflow-centered in a government organizations. Yeah, I know the companies are probably all sitting there saying, huh? Because I was at ATK, I'm a process wonk, but it's not normal in government institutions. So that's where I'm most getting where people are used to, this is how we do this. And it yields this product in this way. The tech, I think the things that keep me up are data standards and data engineering. And one of the things that we run into is hiring people. And we've got some great folks and we've been able to get lucky, but it's not like there's a huge pool of really knowledgeable people on Redstone Arsenal for this. And we've gathered up most of them. So if I don't start recruiting data engineers out of Silicon Valley, we're probably have problems is trying to get everything we're trying to do done there. You may notice a couple things I did not mention: AI, ML. BAM has AI and ML in the log automation side. It will come into our stuff right now in the current set of plans and visions. Using it directly in our processes is not part of the rocks we've taken on. So I'll hold there, let Dave go, and then we'll wrap up some questions.
How much time we have, Bill?
Yeah, well, 25 minutes, but you still got feet.
Okay.
I will be quick.
Okay.
All right. I'm gonna put my chart. I'm only gonna talk.
Yeah, just go to the second chart. That's the only one I'm going to talk to. So I'm not, in the interest of time, rather than going through all the charts. Yeah, data access has been a problem for years, right? So you don't have to go to digital engineering to know we've had access problems, because I can't tell how many times I went to Skorsky, just want to see their schedule down to a level 6, and I could only get level 3 in print, right? So how do I make my own schedule when I can only get that? This is across vendors. Now, we're not talking about Innovia and schedules and project and trying to just do fundamental things. Now we're talking about going to digital engineering, and now I want to see everything that you produce and every part you're going to buy, and the background and certification of that part. So there are challenges here, there's no question, right? So we're going to have to drop some of our guards, and we're going to have to figure out exactly how we do it, but we need to do that sooner rather than later. We will not be having these conversations after we educated our teams and then find out we have barriers to access that prevent us from really using the digital environment. So enterprise deployment, there's 2 aspects to enterprise deployment that are really important to understand. It's not just a government versus the contractor. It's within the Army, right? There's stovepipes. DLA does not process their data like the PM processes the data, and we have to move things through different systems within the Army in order to procure systems and sustain them. So all of those processes we need to think through as we're developing the data. We tend to focus on the development effort and getting through milestone C. And there's a lot less discussion about what happens to that data as we move through the whole life cycle and going downstream. Data forms change, and we want to keep that digital construct. We don't want to keep because DLA procures parts, and they need the engineering technical data that was formed the basis for the part that they're buying and want to buy faster, cheaper, and get different kinds of spares. So all of that data has to have some consistency. And even when, as the tech chief in Armed Scout Helicopter, I can't tell you how many times we would get down to purchasing a swash plate, and DLA was procuring, wanted to go buy a cheaper swash plate, but they didn't have all the latest engineering data that they were sending out for the procurement. So that already is an existing problem within the data we have, but in the digital environment, it has the chance to be. So we have to think inter as well as external about how we need data access, sharing among the contractors, sharing among suppliers, but also among the different organizations that have different concepts. Model usage and version control, this is problems we're already having. Moving from, the 3DS from one version to the next, when we built all our software in one and somebody else is building it in an old or a newer version, and now they don't quite made up. MATLAB's had this problem for years. It's a tool we've been using. I can't tell you how many times Dr. Tischler would pull me off to the side and say, dang it, they just came out with a new version of MATLAB and changed all the basic control modules in there, and they don't work at all with my software. So it happens among all software. It's not just this digital engineering software that this is a problem, but it becomes more prevalent in this environment where we're reliant on that single source of truth or authoritative. So that authoritative source is not just the data that you're providing, but the software that created that data is a big important part of that aspect. And then contractual issues, we have to make sure that we think through the contracting. What are we asking for? What do we specifically want? I remember back when we started accepting models out of CAD instead of just drawings, there was a lot of gnashing of teeth because we didn't have a standard for how to accept models. Now we've done that. It's in every contract. It's a blurb in everybody's contract that we follow. We need to do the same for a lot of these tool sets that we're doing. We need to come up with that standardized set of data that we submit contractually out to folks, but without trapping them to a type of software. And we talked a little bit about that, the flat formats, the flat files for IGES files. Those are an example, but we need to think broader. You know, if we're going to develop flight control diagrams, and the flight control diagram is going to define exactly how the aircraft fly, how do we define how to deliver that file to us so that we understand the technical data that's in it and we can build from it if we choose to. But we've got to have that technical backing of how that file needs to be delivered to us. We don't do that for a lot of the data we already get now. We just get the deliverable and look at the results. We don't necessarily look at the model itself, and that's got to change. And then proprietary data issues, this gets to points of obfuscation. There are going to be things that the contractor owns that he doesn't want to make visible to you, but we still need the models to work. And so there's been discussions of obfuscation and being able to give us a black box. And if we want to see the block, do like we do now, go down to the vendor side, you'll open it up, you get 5 seconds to look at it, and then I'm going to close it again. But we're going to have to do that in the digital environment, because that same digital environment is going to go out and it be the source of sparing. So if we're going to spare, we're going to procure it differently. We need to know a little bit more about that model. We can't just a file that's 29 black boxes and we get to see one of them. So we have to work through these issues. And I think this, again, the tent being larger in this discussion, I think the tent needs to be larger beyond the technical community. We need contracting officials. We need to bring in folks from business. We need to have a deeper conversation between the vendors, between the government, and internal to the government, how that data is going to be shared, tolerate, because I think that's tolerating, and where liability lies is where all this stuff gets really. So I'll just leave it there for questions. I put some examples in the charts that are out there, along with some potential solutions for those in there if you want to read them, but in the interest of time.
Thanks, Jeff. Hey, Pete, you're up.
Okay, hey, I gotta admit, I'm caught a bit off guard here, thinking this is going to be kind of an open Q&A type panel. So other than the charts I showed earlier, I have no charts to add. I do have a couple of points here to make. I think Mike said earlier that you know, believed industry was ahead of DoD, and I think from a capabilities standpoint, we absolutely are going to have to align on that if we're going to be able to take advantage of these capabilities. The other part of it, and I think Lars hit on it pretty good, is the culture, the training. I mentioned earlier that, you know, when we first went full MBD on 525, followed it on 505, and have been doing that on some of our other platform developments. We learned a lot of lessons there. And the first rattle out of the box for us was basically design engineers taking a 2D process into a 3D world. So, you know, if you're gonna fully dimension a part and label every part number and do this, you know, have the same types of behaviors in creating engineering definition in a model-based environment, you're going to lose the value of that. And we've also seen initially that, you know, those fully detailed MBD files are sent downstream, and the centers are printing them out like drawings and manually entering dimensions and things of that nature into dimensional inspection sheets. So we can build a really great capability, but if we don't have the culture to adopt it appropriately, it's really all for naught. Again, I apologize. I was looking back at your notes, Dr. Lewis, and saw where you kind of had some thought lines in there. But again, I didn't pick up on the fact that we were supposed to bring charts to this. So I will definitely help out with the time.
And not required, Pete. Charts are not required. Okay, so questions for the crowd. I mean, I think this panel is one of the ones that has breadth in terms of identifying the issues associated with getting to a solution broadly across the acquisition process. So let them have it.
I got a question. So going forward, to what level of detail do you think you'll want model data? I mean, clearly at the platform level, platform architecture, but are you going to want like Gerber files for printed circuit board with every box in there, or are you going to rely on maybe open architectures to define some of those interfaces so that if something goes obsolete, you can easily curate a replacement? What are you guys thinking about? How far down do you drill?
So, well, I'll just say, I don't think open architecture takes the place, just because you have an open architecture takes the place of SRD wanting to know what the rating of that circuit is and, how the EMI is going to, I mean, a lot of technical data that needs to be provided in order to discern that. So I think it depends on a particular user in there, but I do think that's one of the things that we have to define as part of this model-based environment, just like I talked about with the drawings, is that we have to define the level that we want certain drawings to be provided in order to facilitate the various stakeholders to gain the approvals. It's just, it's still a work in progress.
And that'll drive not just delivery, but markings or ownership. Again, going back to ITAP, the deliverable rights on ITAP are largely driven by the life cycle support plan. So if you're going to live with an engine for 40 years, you need to, significantly think about what do I want to force source, third source, fourth source. But there's some things that you're never going to shop out because they are, you picked that engine because that company had some technology they were rolling into those parts, and that set of decisions comes from the LCSP. So, if you will, to some degree, the negotiation of the AQP to the AQS would drive what you have to deliver for the Airworthiness Authority, and that's also going to be driven by the FHA, things like that, to say how critical the part is. I think the leadership community is even more sophisticated, I think, than the working level community on the government side about wanting to respect that we're kind of both in this business together. And sometimes it's going to be best that we see everything. Maybe we see it at limited rights or DPR, but there's some things, and particularly the software world, on an interface where unlimited rights are exactly the right answer, and that's because that interface is defined by one of Matt's architectural models of how things like in the aviation multi-core process for the AMCS are going to be. That's a place where we want to do a lot of rapid change, a lot of low-cost software, bringing the small guys and stuff like that. And so in that place where hopefully most of those are lower DAO items, there could be a lot of tailoring of it. So there's not a one size fits all. It can be tailored by what you're buying, its qualification, its sustainment, et cetera.
So there's one other aspect that a couple of the speakers talked about earlier today. That isn't really specifically a digital engineering approach, but is an enabler for it, and that's this whole notion of collaboration. Okay, we have paid lip service to that term collaboration in various degrees over time and stuff. We have a couple programs going on right now, FARA and FLARA, where we've taken it very, very seriously. Okay? And we have collaboratively with the PAHs on one program and performers of the other program have jointly modified our respective internal processes. And we are working at the IPT level collaboratively in their contractor data systems with direct access and logins and all the right permissions to be able to do so through the security people and stuff. We are working within their systems to be able to facilitate the near-term program, largely because of schedule driving all schedules are very aggressive. Let's leave it at that. Okay, and it's forced us to embrace collaboration in a way that the government probably has never done before. And through collaboration, you develop trust. When you develop individual relationships, you develop trust with people. And trust is what we're trying to get to, right? We want to be trusted partners on both sides of the equation stuff. So we don't feel like we have to shield information from each other because I'm trying to not disclose a challenge that I have, or because I'm trying to save intellectual property rights for monetization downstream or something like that. We want to develop that trust. And it's taken some time to get to where we are and some effort. It's put a lot of people out of their comfort zones, but it's been very, very valuable in what we've gotten so far.
And I would say on the 60 Victor lessons learned, there was a lot of collaboration going on, but access was limited.
Yes.
And so because that, so you can have collaboration, but without the access and the direct access to the information, it can lead to mistrust. And that's really where the program got derailed, was the two sides didn't trust each other. They felt they were withholding data, when in fact they weren't withholding data, but because neither one could verify it. But now that kind of got fixed, access got provided, and now that trust has been, it took us a year to get trust back. So I think what Dave said is absolutely right. You can either do it at the beginning or you can pay the price on the backside. That's the reality.
I think we had a question online. Chris, is there a question from a virtual?
Yes, we have a couple here. One from my Russ Wetzel. Could you comment on the development of hiring authorities for data scientists expert in MBSE, vice aerospace engineers turned into MBSE users? Does that make sense?
Yeah, how about if we wait on the workforce section for that next panel?
Sure. Okay, we'll go ahead and put a bookmark on that one. We have another question here. I always worry about increasing proficiency with the use of tools and models and a loss of understanding for what the tools and models are good for. Do you think the integration of all these different discipline tools into an integrated enterprise suite will increase the risk that people will use the tools and models inappropriately? That is from Bruce Tenney.
Inappropriately? Okay. Hey, Pete, why don't you field that?
Inappropriate. We absolutely have to have some rigor around, modeling and simulation and our VV&A processes. And I mean, that's been a challenge for us internally because we use different tools for across different functions. We're trying to wrangle all that and bring that into more of a common approach, but absolutely critical that we can trust the data coming out of these systems, coming out of these models and simulations. And again, it's rigor around configuration management, your input decks, maintaining parameters of those models. I think we've got a big opportunity. We're not quite there yet in connecting, Cameo architecture to some of our analysis models to better automate that, to drive better quality there. But definitely is a concern, and that's definitely something that we're looking at. Just real quick, I'd like to foot stomp Dave's comment. My team supports both FLAR and FAR programs at Bell, and it's really been a good experience. It's really been collaborative. I would say that I think there's a little bit of a lack of transparency now because we are in a competitive environment, but this has really been a good start. I think it's been a great accomplishment for both industry and for the Army. And really looking forward to, as we go further, that we can kind of open up the dialogue a little bit more once we get past the competitive environment we're in currently. Over.
Dave, go ahead.
I think one of the things that adds to that addition of rigor to the process and making sure that you're applying the correct tool in the correct manner is the role that tech fellows play within the companies, right? Most companies have a program, it's a tech fellow-like program, but properly empowering them to be able to have meaningful input into the process prior to decisions being made on the programmatic side is very critical. We have, within SRD, we have made use of a similar process. We're not calling them tech fellows, we're calling them non-advocate reviewers, somebody that is separated from the airworthiness review of that program, but has sufficient experience and subject matter expertise in a discipline to be able to see, are we properly oversighting and requiring the right things and looking at the satisfaction of a requirement by an approach that isn't necessarily we thought was the correct approach going into it. So we're trying to embrace the same concept of senior experienced people providing their independent view of the adequacy of satisfaction of airworthiness requirements.
So we have two levels on it. A lot of these newer tools provide automation for both quality, sufficiency, and standardization. It's not perfect, but it helps. And so the challenge for us has been getting the foot all the way down to the floor about insisting upon using, for instance, our style guide, and then getting that into SEPs, and then on the industry side, it's the same. The other part is, if you will, SME review. And I remember one SME review, and it essentially led to a law is, I don't care how many views you've got, if the views are just junk, it's still a bad model. Sometimes people say, I've got a lot of diagrams, that's the measure of goodness of the model in a SysML program, and it's just not. And so we've had a couple of go-rounds of that. I would say it's an emerging bit of engineering practice, but those are at least two of the approaches we've had.
And your comment about systems engineers versus aerospace engineers, I think there's a balance there that I think every discipline goes down and eventually gets to the tools that are specific for the particular discipline that are defined and the experts are there. But it's how they trickle back up and show the effects across the platform that in these complex systems is really hidden is hidden from us in the text-based deliverables that can show up in the models. So I think you need folks that the validity of the model needs to be specified by the people in the functional expertise areas down at the bottom, but you still need systems engineers that understand the modeling and can look at the cross interfaces to see those unintended consequences that, like the one that always comes up, flight controls affecting structures, or, you having some kind of dynamic mode somewhere that affects the ability of a sensor to go somewhere. That's where the model can potentially really show value. And that requires a systems engineer looking crosswise and then going back to the experts in each area and working the problem. So I think there's a balance there. But I think we got to make sure that we know what the validity of the model is at each stage and keep looking at maturity of that model to understand its validity at each stage of the program.
And one of the bear traps is assuming that MBSE makes better system engineers. It's not at all the case. If they were dud SEs coming in, using all the tools in the world, they're still dud. So if the system engineering is not good, fancy diagrams won't make it done.
Okay, I think one more question. I do this part-time. My full-time job is to make the map site job as easy as possible. Given the fact that we want all this open information, this open system, and everybody's going to be able to have access to that data, how do you wind up protecting that data so that, the genie doesn't get out of the box from company X?
ABAC, based on role, based on user role. So I think it's a common term, but authority-based access control, we allow people to see what they're authorized to see and what they need to see. The data's all there, but you're filtering it by user.
So how do you filter that? Lars, how do you plan to filter that information? I want to do something. How do you know that
It's both ways. The
Yeah.
data is tagged as to what its restrictions are, if it's MTCR or CUI or GPR, et cetera. So you tend to have classification and intellectual property information basically on almost every piece of data and metadata. That's kind of on the data side. And then on the person, as the person comes in, you've granted them certain types of access based on their training, their affiliations, their role, and their need to know. And that's why I said at that product level and below, that's where the knowledge of June Bob should have that access or not. That's where that exists. My shop can't do that. The sub-product manager level at FARA can figure out, yes, that guy from MITRE needs that or not.
Yeah, but on AMCS, I don't think that every app vendor needs to see every technical aspect of the AMCS platform. That's not how DO-297 works. That's not how it works in the commercial space right now. If you want to be an app developer, then you just need to know how to plug your app into the transport layer. So I think we got to get smart about exactly how we're doing that.
And we only need to provide app to those. I guarantee you, Apple doesn't provide every aspect of their technical data for the dang iPhone. Just so an app a guy with Sudoku can put an app on that phone, right? But there is a set of APIs and a set of, this is the data I need, and this is the data that's available. And then they integrate that into the app, not the other way around. So I think there is a way to do this in the open system architecture, but it's not the way we're doing business now. And so, and I think even vendors got to get to the point where, if you want to sell that box and you want to make that AMCS platform work, you're going to give enough data rights in that transport layer and open it up, because that's not where the money is. The money's in the platform itself, and you providing, 100, 10,000 of those boxes to the United States Army. So I think industry needs to think a little bit differently as we go to this open system architecture, because the money's in the transport layer and moving apps in and out of that thing. That's where Lars gets his benefit from rapidly reconfiguring. But it's not in the platform. And then secondly, we got to get the data, we got to get the technical data to where we truly follow a DO 297 approach, where that platform gets certified, and it gets certified robustly. So we're not having to go back to the Airworthiness Authority. The Airworthiness Authority has confidence in the platform. We've done aberrant apps against the multi-core. We've done aberrant apps against the board support layer and everything else, that now we can put all sorts of apps on there. We don't have to dig back into the platform every time we throw an app on the box. So I think the government side needs to do a little bit different thinking about how we've done airworthiness in the past. And I think that is going on actively right now in the multi-platform division. And we're really digging into the DO 297 as part of Matt's most IPAT for qualification and material release. I think the real challenge on open systems is not going to be in what data we give to everybody. It's going to be in how do we get the material release guys to follow a similar digital engineering process as we keep putting capability in terms of apps, and they don't have to go back and look at the platform again. In terms of suitability, should be of the combination of apps, not of the platform.
So guys, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for being on the panel. Appreciate it.